Hello, and welcome to our next video where we're covering the rest. Well, the next portion of our video, we will cover some more articles and readings from Bartolome de las Casas and other storytellers that have documented cases of the atrocities that happened in the Americas. Happy New Year. It's great to, begin and start the future content of 2026. Look forward to making more videos and other content with you as the channel moves on through the year. So thank you all that have subscribed and those that are watching and aren't subscribed yet. Hello. Please feel free to subscribe. And yeah, we'll start from there. Juan, unless you had anything to add.
I was just gonna say Happy New Year's. It's good to see you guys, and yeah, we just got to get the ball rolling for this year as well. So we'll get right back at it to this Bartolome de las Casas' reading.
Sweet. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and share my screen really quick and we can begin. All right. Now we made it.
We made it. We made it, man.
We made it. Cool. So as you all were following from the previous videos, we went over chapters where Bartolome de las Casas wrote his work about the atrocities that happened in the Caribbean. And then the previous video, we discussed the issues and terrible events that happened within the American mainland, specifically in Central America. So we'll just continue off from here. Juan, I guess I'll go first, unless you wanted to go.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure, sweet. So I'll put on my glasses and we can go ahead and start. So, New Spain continued. Among other massacres was one which took place in Cholula, a great city of some 30,000 inhabitants. When all dignitaries of the city and region came out to welcome the Spaniards with all due pomp and ceremony, the priest to the fore and the high priest at the head of the procession, and then proceeded to escort them into the city and lodge them. Oh, yeah, did I say that right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And lodge them in the houses of the Lord and leading citizens. The Spaniards decided that that moment had come to organize a massacre, or punishment, as they themselves expressed such things, in order to inspire fear and terror in all the people of the territory. This was indeed the pattern they followed in all the lands they invaded, to stage a bloody massacre of the most public possible kind in order to terrorize those meek and gentle peoples. What they did was the following. They requested the local lord to send all the nobles and leading citizens of the city and all of the surrounding communities subject to it, and soon as they arrived and entered the building to begin talks with the Spanish commander, they were seized without anyone outside getting wind of what was afoot. Part of the original request was that they should bring with them 5,000 or 6,000 native bearers, and these were mustered in the courtyards when and as they arrived. One could not watch these poor wretches getting ready to carry the Spaniards' packs without taking pity on them. Stark naked as they were, with only their modesty hidden from view, each with a kind of little net on his shoulders, in which he carried his own modest store of provisions. They all got down on their haunches and waited patiently like sheep. Once they were all safely inside the courtyard, together with a number of others who were also there at the time, armed guards took up positions covering the exits, and Spanish soldiers unsheathed their swords and grasped their lances and proceeded to slaughter these poor innocents. Not a single soul escaped. After a day or two had gone by, several victims surfaced, soaked from head to foot in the blood of their fellows beneath whose bodies they had sheltered. So thick was the carpet of corpses in the courtyard, and, with tears in their eyes, pleaded for their lives. But the Spaniards showed them no mercy, nor any compassion, and no sooner did they crawl out from under the pile of corpses than they were butchered. The Spanish commander gave orders that the leading citizens, who numbered over 100, and were roped together and were tied to stakes set in the ground and burned alive. One of these dignitaries, however, who may well have been the first among them, and the king of the whole region managed to get free and took refuge, along with 20 or 30 or 40 others, in the great temple of the city, which was fortified and was known in the local language as Q. There they put up a stout defense against the Spaniards, which lasted for the best part of the day. But the Spaniards, against whom no resistance is really possible, especially when it is mounted by unarmed civilians, set fire to the temple, burning those inside alive, the victims shouting all the time, "O wicked men, what harm have we done to you? Why do you kill us? Wait till you get to Mexico City, for there our great king Montezuma will avenge our deaths." It is said that while the Spaniards were slaughtering 5 or 6 thousand men gathered in the courtyard, their commander regaled his men with snatches of narrow watch from Tarpe's height. The flames engulf Rome's awesome might. Children and ancients shout in pain. He all regards with cold disdain. They were responsible also for the huge massacre in Tepeca, a city bigger than Chaula, with one with a larger population. Here the Spaniards put countless thousands to the sword in the cruelest possible manner. From Chaula, they made their way to Mexico City. On their journey, they were showered with thousands of gifts from the great King Montezuma, who also sent some of his men to stage entertainments and banquets for them on the way. When they reached the great causeway, which runs from 2 leagues right up to the city itself, they were greeted by Montezuma's own brother and many local dignitaries, bearing valuable gifts of gold, silver, and apparel from the great lord. At the city gates, Montezuma himself came out to meet them, carried on a litter of gold and surrounded by the entire court. He escorted them into the city to the great houses where he had directed they should be lodged. Yet the same day, although I am reliably informed by a number of eyewitnesses, the Spaniards seized the great king unawares by means of a trick and held him under armed guard of 80 soldiers, eventually putting him in irons. But leaving aside all of this, although much passed of consequence and one could dwell upon it at length, I should like to relate just one incident contrived tyrants. It happened that the Spanish commander had occasion to go to the seaport to deal with one of his captains who was planning an attack on him, and he left another of his henchmen with 100 or so men at his command to guard King Montezuma while he was away. The garrison decided to stage a show of strength and thereby boost the fear that they inspired in the people of this kingdom. A classic Spanish tactic in these campaigns, as we have had occasion to remark before. All the local citizens, great and small, as well as all the members of the court, were wholly taken up with entertaining their imprisoned lord. To this end, they organized fiestas, some of which involved staging traditional dances every afternoon and an evening in the squares and residential quarters throughout the city. These dances are called in the local language mitotes, those typical of the islands being known as arridos. And since these dances are the principal form of public entertainment and enjoyment among the people, they deck themselves out in all their best finery, and the entertainment were organized with close attention to rank and station. The noblest of the citizens dancing nearest the building where their lord was being held. Close by this building, they danced over 2,000 youths of quality, the flower of the nobility of Montezuma's whole empire. Thither the Spanish captain made his way, accompanied by a platoon of his men, under pretense of wanting to watch the spectacle, but in fact carrying orders to attack the revelers at a prearranged time. Further platoons with identical orders having been dispatched to the other squares where entertainments were being staged. The nobles were totally absorbed in what they were doing and had no thought for their own safety when the soldiers drew their swords and shouting, "For St. James and Adam men," proceeded to slice open the leaf in the naked bodies of the dancers and to spill their noble blood. Not one dancer was left alive, and the same story was repeated in the other squares throughout the city. The series of events caused horror and anguish and bitterness throughout the land. The whole nation was plunged into mourning and until the end of time. I'll finish this last part. And at least as long as a few of these people survive, they will not cease to tell and retell. In their arios and dances, just as we do at home in Spain with our ballads, the sad story of a massacre which wiped out the entire nobility, beloved and respected by them for generations and generations. Okay. Okay. Stop there.
Once the native population learned of this barbaric and unprecedented outrage perpetrated against innocent individuals who had done nothing whatever to deserve such cruelty, the whole city, which had up to then tolerated the equally unmerited imprisonment of its lord and master simply because he himself had issued orders that no one was to fight the Christians nor to offer any resistance to them, took up arms and attacked them. Many Spaniards were wounded and only narrowly managed to make good their escape. They ordered Moctezuma on the terrace at dagger point and forced him to order his men not to attack the house and to cease their insurrection. But the people ceased altogether at that juncture to obey such orders, and there was a feeling that they should elect another lord in Moctezuma's place who would be able and willing to lead them in battle. At this point, it became known that the Spanish commander was on his way back from the coast after his victory over the rebel forces, and that he was not far off and was bringing reinforcements. There followed a lull in the fighting, which lasted until he arrived some 3 or 4 days later. Meanwhile, the number of protesters had swollen with the influx of the people from all over the territory. Once the commander arrived, the natives attacked with such unrelenting ferocity that it seemed to the garrison that not one of them would be left alive, and they decided to abandon the city in secret and at night. The locals got wind of this, catching up with many as they fled across the causeways that spanned the lake and killing them in great numbers, as indeed they had every right to, given the attacks that we have described that had been made on them. A reasonable, fair-minded man will see that theirs was a defensive action and a just one. The Spaniards then regrouped, and there followed a battle for the city in which terrible and bizarre outrages were committed against the indigenous population, vast numbers of whom were killed and many others, several leaders among them, burned alive. After the vile outrages and abominations perpetrated by the Spaniards, both in Mexico City itself and throughout the whole region, an area of 10 or 15 or 20 leagues all around the city, saw countless natives perish at their hands. They transferred their pestilential attentions to the densely populated Panuco province, where once again they swept through the territory, pillaging and murdering on the grand scale as they went. They then moved on to the provinces of Tuxtepec, Implicingo, and finally Colima, each one of them greater in the extent of the kingdoms of Castile and Leon, and in each they wrought the same destruction as they had in Mexico City and its province. It would be impractical to compile a complete dossier of all the atrocities, foul murders, and other barbarities they committed, and any such account would be so lengthy it would prove impossible for the reader to take in. It should be recalled that the pretext upon which the Spanish invaded each of these provinces and proceeded to massacre the people and destroy their lands which teemed with people and which should surely have been the joy and delight to any true Christian, was purely and simply that they were making good the claim of the Spanish crown to the territories in question. At no stage had any other order been issued entitling them to massacre the people or to enslave them. Yet whenever the natives did not drop everything and rush to recognize publicly the truth of the irrational logical claims that were made, and whenever they did not immediately place themselves completely at the mercy of the iniquitous and cruel and bestial individuals who were making such claims, they were dubbed outlaws and held to be in rebellion against His Majesty. This indeed was the tenor of the letters that were sent back to the Spanish court, and everybody involved in the administration of the New World was blind to the simple truth enshrined in the first principles of law and government that nobody who is not a subject of a civil power in the first place can be deemed in law to be a rebellion against that power. Any reasonable person who knows anything of God, of the rights and civil law, can imagine for himself that the likely reaction would be of any of the people living peacefully within their own frontiers, unaware that they owe allegiance to anyone save their natural lords, were a stranger suddenly to issue a demand along the following lines: you shall henceforth obey a foreign king whom you have never seen nor ever heard of, and if you do not, we will cut you to pieces, especially when they discover that these strangers are indeed quite prepared to carry out this threat to the letter. Even more shocking is the fact that when the local people do obey such commands, they are harshly treated as common slaves, put to hard labor and subjected to all manner of abuse and to agonizing torments that ensure a slower and more painful death than would summary execution. Indeed, for them, the end result is the same. They, their wives, and their children all perish, and the whole of their nation is wiped from the face of the earth. And so, blinded by ambition and driven by the greeds, are the devils who advocate such treatment of these people that they cannot see that. When their victims come to obey under duress this foreign overlord and publicly recognize his authority over them, simply because of their fear of what will happen to them if they do not, such a recognition of suzerainty has no standing in the law whatever. Any such prerogative obtained by menaces from any people anywhere in the world being invalid. In practice, the only rights these perfidious crusaders have earned, which can be upheld in human, divine, or natural law, are the right to eternal damnation and the right to answer for the offenses and the harm they have done the Spanish crown by utterly ruining every one of these kingdoms, and as far as it is within their power, invalidating all the claims the Spanish crown may have to the territories of the New World. These, then, are the true services they have performed and continue to perform for their sovereign in this part of the world. With this unimpeachable title to possession, this tyrant of a commander sent two of his captains, both of them even more ferocious and barbaric, more implacable and merciless than he was himself, to two vast, prosperous, and highly favored kingdoms, sharing a common frontier and some 300 leagues from Mexico City. The first of these two densely populated realms, Guatemala, lies on the Pacific. The other, known as Naco and Honduras, or Guaymura, has an Atlantic seaboard. Both expeditionary forces were well-manned, with both cavalry and infantry, the commander standing one over land and the other by sea. It is no exaggeration to say that one could make a whole book, and a book that would stagger not only contemporaries but future generations also, out of the atrocities, barbarities, murders, clearances, ravages, and other foul injustices perpetrated by members of these two expeditions, and particularly by those that went to Guatemala, the leader of the other expedition coming to an abrupt and sticky end. Here were abominations that not only outdid in number and in kind everything that had been seen before in the New World, but also went far beyond those perpetrated by contemporaries. Vast tracts of lands laid waste and turned into desert, and an incalculable number of natives killed. The seaborne expedition sacked the towns all along the coast, committing all manner of violence against the people who lived there, as, for example, when the locals of Yucatan, a province which lay on their route to the kingdom of Naco and Guimara, whither the Spaniards were headed and came out to greet them and offer them gifts, and then the Spaniards, once they had landed, sent out raiding parties throughout the territory, robbing and killing and destroying everything and everyone in sight. There was one Spanish captain who mutinied and, taking 300 men with them, set off inland towards the kingdom of Guatemala, burning and looting the towns and robbing and killing those who lived there. He deliberately followed such a scorched earth policy for some 120 leagues, so that, should his erstwhile companion in arms decide on pursuit, they would find the whole region empty and barren, and all the local people athirst to take revenge on the pursuers in return for the harm and destruction wrought by him and his men. A few days later, the officer in overall charge of the expedition against whom he had mutinied was killed, and his place taken by a whole series of barbaric despots who inflicted unspeakable cruelty on the natives, butchering them, enslaving them, and selling them to the merchant sailors in exchange for wine, clothing, and other things. The despotism of the invaders and the enslavement of the population led, between 1524 and 1535, to the complete destruction of all the territories of the kingdom of Naco and Honduras, once a veritable paradise on the earth, supporting a denser population than anywhere else in the world. Nowadays, when one travels through this area, one sees nothing but bare ruined settlements, and whole melancholy spectacle is enough to melt the hardest of hearts. During these 11 years, more than 2 million souls have perished, and in an area of more than 100 leagues by 100 leagues, only 2,000 survivors are to be seen, and even this number is shrinking day by day as the survivors succumb to the rigors of a life of slavery. Turning our attention once more to the implacable tyrant in charge of the Guatemala expedition, we find him outdoing, as we have already had occasion to remark, all his predecessors in cruelty and barbarism, rivaling in wickedness even those who are active in the area today. He covered, as he was to report back to the commander who had sent the expedition, a distance of some 400 leagues from the provinces around Mexico City to Guatemala border, killing, stealing, burning, and pillaging. His pretext for destroying everything and everyone in his past was the one we have seen invoked before, that the locals must recognize this suzerainty of a bunch of inhuman and unjust barbarians who proclaim themselves the representatives of the Spanish sovereign the locals have never seen, of whom they had never heard, and whom they soon judged to be even more cruel than his agents, for he and his men never allowed the people time to think over the implications of this proclamation, but fell upon them, killing and burning the minute it had been read. And the next chapter would be New Spain, Panuco, and Jalisco.
No, so they just I was always like kind of curious of how the Spaniards did that, like eliminating people through their kind of through their navy, right? Or through their ships. So they would like land in coastal areas
Yeah,
of
this
Central
is
America.
that was one of the methods here for this invasion. See, but this is incredibly valuable to read because here's what happened with one of the. I took a snippet of one of our previous readings, I believe, like the first episode we did, and I put it on TikTok. And this one guy commented, and I debated him, and so did another person. He was completely in the wrong, but he tried to cope. I don't think he's a straight up Hispanista, but he was trying to minimize like the atrocities we were talking about. So he started saying like, okay, yes, Spain committed genocide in the Caribbean, but they didn't do this inland. He started trying to cope with that. And as we can see, as what we just read, they did do it inland. As you can see, they mentioned 2 cities before they even got to Mexico City where they wiped out a shit ton of people and just slew them for no reason. So it's like, yes, they did. They also did it inland. And I told them back then because they also tried to do that with the Guachicil, but the Guachicil, obviously there was a huge war and they fought for decades. So they weren't successful, but that was their policy with the Guachicil, the Chichimecas. Back then it was a genocidal policy. But as we can see, we don't even have to go there. It was already here from the moment they landed in Mexico. That's why I was like, when I debated with them, I'm like, no, dude, it still took place. Now, the fact that there are still plenty of natives in Mexico, the fact that there's plenty of native mixed people and that we have a lot of native DNA on average, that is in spite of the genocides that happened. It's not because the Spaniards were good people. It's not because they were more merciful. It's in spite of how barbaric they were that we still managed to keep that we didn't end up like the Caribbean as far as like losing the vast majority of the natives living there, right? But that's not, it's not because the Spaniards were decided to suddenly be more moral compared to like what the 5 years before they had landed on the fucking Caribbean. It's like, no, they were still the same pieces of shit, but I just thought that was just weird. It's like, because I've always heard that, like I said, if you bring up the Caribbean, I feel like a lot of Hispanistas will default to what that guy defaulted to, which is like, well, we didn't do that in the mainland. It was just in the Caribbean, as if that makes it any better. How does that even make it any better? It's like the Spaniards and I guess the people you're identifying with, like these Hispanistas, right? We're still at the end of the day, genocidal maniacs and pieces of shit. So it doesn't matter even if they only did in the Caribbean, but that's not even the case.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at Nicaragua and other areas in Central America that have large like African populations. How the hell do you think those African populations got there? It's because the native populations that were there were completely wiped out, and then they decided to replace those natives that were no longer there, they being the Spanish European people, the Spaniards over there, replace them with Africans. That's why there's so many Africans in Honduras. That's why there's so many in Nicaragua. Is because their ancestors were there to replace the natives that they eliminated, by the way. So if there's any talk about freaking great replacement theory, I would say that the only way that the great replacement theory is true is with native people, essentially, because Spaniards did the great replacement. That's
Yeah.
why. That's it was, which I think it's always funny when you see people like Elon Musk saying like, "Oh, great replacement." I'm like, idiot. Like, tell me, are Europeans being hunted down out of their houses and enslaved and then having some other race from God knows where come to replace them? No. Like, shut the hell up.
Not at all. I honestly, there was I forgot. I mean, I'm not gonna say her name anyways, but it was a random person on one of my TikTok comments like sections, and she was a white lady. She watched a lot of my videos on TikTok. I don't even know why she wanted to watch them, but she ended up talking to me one time, like on DMs, and we were kind of debating certain things, right? And she was saying that she felt like she's like, well, like the U.S., like you just have so many like Hispanics coming in, and she didn't know like they like natives, right? Because she knows what our ancestry primarily is. So she was
Sure.
saying, she's like, you have all this, and like there's just like people marrying out, and like it, like the country's just becoming less white, and like she's like, I'm scared, and all this other, and I started laughing at her a little bit because I'm like, you're scared, but it's like historically speaking, your people genocided my people to a huge degree. It's like nobody's treating you guys like this. Nobody's coming here and killing you guys in mass on the street and performing mass executions on you. All we're doing is moving into a place and having children, but you guys can't even keep up with that. That you're that pathetically fragile, that you're fucking crying as if you're getting slaughtered on a mass scale when you guys are the ones that did that to our people. Like, how are you acting like you're scared, motherfucker? Your people are the ones that slaughtered ours in the past. We've never done that to y'all.
Well, I would say that that woman has probably absorbed a lot of propaganda and probably Eurocentric uh, clan style propaganda
It
that's
has to
probably
be.
been perpetrated by Musk or other weirdos that have said that, like, oh, you're all victims, right? And you're under attack, you're being replaced, blah blah blah, right? As I'm sitting in my comfortable TV room typing, saying I'm being replaced. Like, they don't even know what that means. They don't know what
Nah, dude.
replacement means.
Like, yeah,
Um,
exactly. It's like this is true replacement right here. What they were doing, like killing millions of natives, and then colonizing and settling there with all these fucking Spanish rats. Like that,
yeah, it
that's
wasn't.
replacement.
Yeah, it was the Spanish, the British, and the French did it too. So you were right to say what you said, Juan. Um,
Yeah,
Gets me
that
heated
that's
up.
yeah, that's what I was telling you. I was like on the basis of like race. I'm like your race did that to my race. I was like nobody has done that to you guys ever. It's like you're just complaining because you guys don't have enough children to sustain your own population rate. Like how is that any of our fucking problems? It's like talk to your own people. I don't know what to fucking tell you.
Yeah, I agree. Good. I'm glad you said that to her. Um, Now we got New Spain, Ponoco, and
Jalisco.
Jalisco.
If they're talking about Jalisco for Mexico, dude, let me give you something. Maybe you already knew this, but for the people that are Mexican American, they'll know that Jalisco is apparently a pretty white state in Mexico, right? A lot of people there can be almost completely European. That's why they have blonde hair and colored eyes and like really white skin. So there's a lot of Europeans in Jalisco. Me seeing the name right here, unless this is in another region and it's not in Mexico, but I feel like this is maybe this maybe is about to reveal an uncomfortable truth about Jalisco itself, the state. We'll see.
Sure, definitely. Did you want to read it, or are you good?
Oh,
You're good. Let me read it.
you can go ahead, man.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. Yeah, definitely. I'm curious to see what I have to say. Um, so we'll start here. So yeah, New Spain, Ponoco, and Jalisco. In 1525, in the wake of the barbarity and carnage we have described and of yet further atrocities committed in the provinces of New Spain and Ponoco, there arrived yet another butcher who was responsible for outrage upon outrage in Ponoco province. He was who saw who saw to the depopulation of the entire province, for he took to branding any number of men as slaves, in the same way as we have seen others do before him, and bundling them on to vessel after vessel for transport to the island slave markets of Cuba and Hispaniola, where they would fetch a better price. Lovely. He also bartered one mare against 80 locals. Against that is 80 members of the human race. He was later appointed as the governor of Mexico City and of the whole New Spain, presiding over the audiencia there with a number of fellow villains as his my magistrates. It's an interesting word. Together, they conspired to effect a devastation that beggars all description, committing outrages and atrocities, robberies, and every other form of abomination. They brought the whole province to such a state that had God not cut short their efforts, first through the opposition mounted by Franciscan friars and through the establishment of a godly and just audiencia, they would within the space of 2 short years have reduced the whole of New Spain to that state of utter wretchedness that now greets the visitor to the island of Hispaniola. For example, one of this man's companions in arms decided that he would have a wall built to enclose some land he had acquired, imported 8,000 natives to work, unpaid and unfed, on this project, and took not a blind bit of notice when one after another they dropped dead of hunger. Once he learned that a new audiencia had been appointed and was already on its way, the villain already responsible for bringing Panoco province to its knees set off inland in search of fresh fields for his talents, taking with him some 15 or 20,000 hapless Mexicans to carry his baggage and that of his fellow Spaniards. Of the native bearers, fewer than 200 were to survive the journey. All the others perished en route. When he fetched up in the province of Michoacan, some 40 leagues from Mexico City, and yet another area every bit as fertile and populous as Mexico itself, the Lord of Michoacan came out in solemn procession with many of his people to welcome him and his men and offer him every kindness, showering them all the while with gifts. The Lord had the reputation of being extremely wealthy and having much gold and silver in his possession. And so the Spaniards seized him in an attempt to force him to hand over his treasures, proceeded to torture him in the fashion I shall now describe. They put him in fetters and tied his hands to a plank which ran through the full length of his body. They then lit a brazier under the soles of his feet and had a lad with a hyssop filled with oil sprinkle them from time to time to ensure a nice, even roasting. On one side of the hapless victim stood one tormentor, holding an armed crossbow pointed at his heart, while on the other stood a second holding a wild dog which constantly snapped at him and would have torn him to pieces in a twinkling of an eye. They went on torturing him in this way, trying to get him to reveal the whereabouts of the gold and silver he was supposed to possess, until a Franciscan finally got wind of what was going on and came and released him, although the poor man later died of the injuries that had inflicted they had inflicted. This is only one instance of the treatment meted on to the lords and leading citizens of these provinces. Many others were tortured and murdered in a similar fashion, in the hope that they could be made to hand over gold and silver. Another of these bullies was appointed at the time of Inspector of Indian Affairs, although in the event he was to prove less interested in their physical and spiritual welfare than he was in their purses and their lands. When he discovered that a number of them still had idols hidden away, the wretched Spaniards, never having taken the trouble to teach them a word about another and better God, he seized them and tortured them into surrendering these idols, thinking that they would be made of gold and silver. When he discovered that they were not, he was so determined not to lose out on a single opportunity to make money, which was what he was after he forced his victims to bring all the gold and silver that they could lay their hands on so that they might buy back their gods and worship them in the traditional manner. This is yet another example of the great deeds of these benighted Spaniards and of the ways in which they bring luster and honor in the name to the name of the Lord. The same butcher then journeyed from Michoacan to the province of Jalisco, which was at the time still virgin territory to the Spanish, one of the most fertile and wonderful parts of the New World. It was home to a huge number of people who lived there undisturbed in harmony and comfort. One of the principal settlements was itself as much as 7 leagues broad. When the Spaniards arrived, the local people came out to welcome them with smiling faces and bearing gifts, as it is custom throughout the New World. But this wretch immediately embarked upon the by now habitual Spanish policy of inflicting pain and terror upon them, acknowledging no limits to his frenzied quest for his great god, gold. He burned towns and cities to the ground, seized the local lords, torturing them and enslaving all those he could lay his hands upon. He led away thousands in chains and burdening the women who had recently given birth with his baggage and that of his wicked companions, so that with the huge loads that they had to carry and the hunger that they were forced to endure, They could no longer carry their children as well, and they were forced to leave them by the side of the road, where they perished in large numbers. One Spaniard who wished to satisfy his evil's lust on a young girl took out his dagger, or as it may be his sword, and cut off the hand of the girl's mother, who was trying to wrench her from his grasp. When the girl persisted in refusing him, he stabbed her to death. Although these people had afforded him every welcome as the honored guest, the commander caused 4,500 of them to be branded as common slaves, even though legally they were all free, as indeed all are indigenous peoples to the New World. Nor did he make any difference between men and women, taking and branding even the children from 1 to 5 years of age, some of them still unweaned, and he committed other atrocities, too many and too dreadful to recount.
I want to address one thing real fast right here.
Sure.
I might even just do a TikTok video on that one part right there specifically because it is ghastly. But here's the thing. Again, it's just another common argument that Hispanistas will try to make. They'll be like, well, and look, we've already covered this when we first read like the first part of the book. And I believe when this was another PDF that we read, it was talking about like genocide and the Hispanic dilemma. Like that was that other piece that we read like in another video a couple episodes ago. But it's like where people will say, well, the Spaniards, they didn't keep the indigenous as slaves forever. They set them free. They said that they didn't have to be slaves. And as we saw, it doesn't matter what technically the law said by the king at this time. That wasn't the practice and reality of what happened. And even then, if they were working in encomienda, it was basically like being treated like a common slave. It was like, it was, in reality, they were just basically slaves, even if they were legally were not technically not slaves, as we're seeing right here. Like that's how they were treated. So like that's why I just think it's so stupid when people try to be disingenuous and they try to like I don't know. It's like they try to give grace to these like pieces of shit, but there's no grace to be given to these like people, like historically, like these Spaniards. Like objectively, they were just very evil people, as we can see.
No, they're extremely evil. There's a special place in hell, I believe, wherever these Spaniards are at. So yeah, I would say that this warrants eternal suffering. I would say that, and even that is being kind. But yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, you said that, Juan. As you can see,
Yeah,
that
because like that's just one of the main things that I just see. It's like it's like these shits like they're always such weak ass responses, and it always frustrates me because these weak ass responses, it's like why like they come from people that are either I guess Hispanistas or even people that are just like mestizo looking, like they have native like notable native ancestry. I'm like, why are you making excuses for these fucking assholes, bro? Like saying like, well they didn't enslave indigenous, and it's like they did. And it's like, well, they didn't enslave them for that long. It's like, why are you trying to minimize these atrocities? They were wrong, they were genocidal, and they were horrible people. There's nothing to minimize. Stop trying.
see, and this is why the unfortunate reality is that much of their Latin education systems, if not all of it, that teaches indigenous history, indigenous suffering, is just completely defunct. You know,
Yeah, it's useless, man. Like they don't teach like the actual reality. They teach some sort of like rose tinted like glasses fucking version of what the fuck happened here, or they completely like ignore that any of this happened. Like people like I said, it's like this whole thing that we're talking about, this whole new Spain section, which I think is very important. And I'll probably release all like a lot of these segments of what we're doing this episode on my TikTok and stuff like that. But like, it's just like again, because you hear it perpetuated a lot. Well, the Spaniards, like they came and like the Mexica were bad people and they were sacrificing so much, and they exaggerate that. The Mexica were not executing that many people or like sacrificing them like that. But like, okay, say that they, even if that were true, how does that justify what the Spaniards did before they even got to Mexico City? Like we saw in two big cities, they went there and they just massacred thousands of people for no fucking reason. So it's like, what like that doesn't fit the whole liberator, like, oh, the Spaniards are so noble, they just came and they liberated, they freed, like they had indigenous allies, you see, because the Mexica were so evil and the Spaniards were just. And it's like, what are you talking about, dude? What the fuck are you talking about? How are these guys saviors? They were fucking vermin. Like I don't know, but it's like they don't even understand, they don't know this type of information because they don't bother. They just accept the fucking common like bullshit tale told, which is like, well, the Spaniards did XYZ and like they conquered, and then there's a beautiful fusion of cultures and like they were good people, and it's like, no, they weren't, dude.
I mean, this is, and to those Hispanistas that are in the United States, I think that they're taught some like really inverted story of how this Latin world came to be by their parents and where their parents come from. There's a very good chance their parents were raised in the Latin education system, uh, and their grandparents. If not, then their grandparents taught that to their parents, right? And that, like, oh, this beautiful quote unquote fusion of cultures that just so happened to be what is today. But it's not beautiful. The unfortunate reality is that it's very Orwellian and dystopian. But we'll
Yeah,
discuss that later. Hmm.
honestly, like I'll make a comparison. This would be. Oh, let me jot this down right here. Let me just. I'm sorry, right here. Um, okay. I wanted to bring up this point. I just kind of thought about it. Um, Marcus, don't you think if like there was like a, let's say like maybe a proper, and I'm not saying this was without an issue, but if there was more like an actual fusion, let's say, of cultures, like rather than what it is today, which is not like it's just a lot of European stuff. Like there are some indigenous elements obviously that survive, but a lot of it obviously is like the Spanish shit. But my thing is like if it was more of like a synthesis, if it was more like a fusion, then what we would have in Mexico or these other places would be more like what you find in the Philippines, where they still speak mostly their native language, Tagalog there, most of them, right? Or their other languages. And Tagalog itself only has some influence of Spanish, like 33% of it is made up of some Spanish words, right? Most of the population is unmixed, like they're just Asian. Um, like maybe some parts can have some Spanish ancestry, but it's very minimal. I would say that if it wasn't like that's like I would say more of a fusion than what happened in Latin America. Obviously, we have a lot of genocide, a lot of like ethnocide, a lot of like imposing one culture and erasing another. So it's not. I would argue that if there was truly more of an actual fusion, then Mexico and all these places would look more like the Philippines. They wouldn't look like what it looks like today.
Yeah. Well, I would even say a fusion would be, I mean, yeah, culturally, yes. I would say a fusion in a way for the Philippines is just because, yeah, there are Spanish words that are borrowed a lot in Tagalog. You're right. That's
I'm not
true.
saying like their colonization of the Philippines was like just or like a good thing either, but I'm saying like it wasn't. They didn't like, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, they didn't commit like huge like massacres or like genocide like with obviously the Caribbean because obviously most of the Filipinos they're like 90% plus 95% plus Asian ancestry. So clearly that didn't happen, and they're still speaking their indigenous language mostly. Mostly they all speak in Filipino languages. They don't speak a Spanish language. So I would say that's what like if there was more like it just like kind of like a cultural fusion or influence, that should be the case in Latin America right now. Which most people like these countries should be mostly speaking their indigenous languages, not Spanish. Like that, this isn't like really. This wasn't really a fusion, in my opinion. This was just ethnocide, really.
Yeah, more of like some accidental amalgamation, I think
But
is
yeah,
what I would
there
say.
we go. An accidental amalgamation of like where you have surviving elements from so many ethnic groups that were destroyed, right? As in like not necessarily physically because we have native ancestry, a lot of us, right? But I'm saying culturally, a lot of these ethnic groups were completely destroyed and wiped out and assimilated. So that's why we have what we have right now. Is like yes, mostly a huge base of European culture with elements of like the different surviving indigenous cultures because you can't get rid of everything. But if it was truly more of a fusion, then you would see what it is. It would be more akin to the Philippines.
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
not what we got.
yeah, we wouldn't have foreign descendant leaders in charge of indigenous countries and mixed native countries. I mean, I'll be very honest with you. I don't have a very I'm not very fond of Latin governments, and I have a large distrust of non-native leaders. I would say. I mean, I think that that's understandable. Look at the Japanese president, right? We don't even know he was freaking born in Peru. What did he do? He genocided indigenous people in the rural areas of Peru. Look at and I could name other accounts too, of genocide, of forced sterilization. You know, if we were truly some harmonious, fused society, culturally fused society, we would never have foreign descendant leaders in charge of us. Sorry, but that's the true reality. I don't have much trust of whoever is there. But even so, even so, the a lot of native descendants that are presidents are responsible also for a lot of terrible things, because of the culture that has been passed down upon them is very anti-indigenous, right? Or anti anything that relates to indigenous culture, native culture, or society for that matter. Um, so if we did have this utopian, culturally fused world, we would have leaders that would never think of killing us, right? Or forcefully sterilizing women of these lands who belong here,
Yeah.
not foreign Japanese leaders who want to sterilize indigenous women, or German doctors that run through the Brazilian Amazon rainforest sterilizing them. That would have never happened. It's not a harmonious cultural, intercultural utopia. That's an Orwellian, um, accidental amalgamation. That's true. I'm sorry if that offends people, but that is the unfortunate reality that people there live in. And this is why none of those countries are on the global stage for accomplishing um, a lot of things that deal with them. I'll stop there. I'm getting too into it, but I'm giving you my full views. Um,
No, I appreciate. I appreciate. I mean, I subscribe to everything that you're saying. I had to just try to note down because I thought it was a really good way that you put it. That what we have now, again, it's not a synergy, it's not a fusion, but it's just an accidental amalgamation. I thought that was a really good and concise way of putting it because that is what it is at the end of the day. That's why it's always irked me whenever I've seen it in textbooks or in other books where I've seen it try to like be dressed up and described as like this beautiful like cultural fusion, and it's like, what are you talking about? There's no fucking fusion.
there's no fusion. Yeah, those are people that have been taught lies, that have been passed down by the parents, passed down by the grandparents, and that they believe it today. So it's hard to break that, but I believe it's possible. Um,
With enough time, I think it's very possible
yeah, I'm
to break through.
optimistic about it. We've changed people before.
I mean, yeah, plenty of people
Yeah.
have even that. I mean, we've had a good amount of people that have messaged both me and Marcus individually or left comments on our videos saying that, oh, I used to think a certain way, and then I started listening to like y'all's historical sources, your videos, you reviewing like kind of like the truth here, things like that, and we have changed people's minds, or people have like if they were ambivalent to the whole thing, now they care about it, which I think is good. I mean, that's the whole purpose of us doing this channel and videos like this because I mean, again, I don't think I don't think anybody else has covered again Bartolome de las Casas' logs like this. I haven't seen it before, so I'm glad that we're doing it, and I'm also throwing some of that stuff up on TikTok because people need to know, man. I mean,
It really is a freaking matrix at the end of the day.
yeah, I
Really
mean,
is.
I'm only getting more and more mad at this the further we read. Obviously, because of the atrocities, but also because I replay a lot of like arguments that I've had in debates online with these Fenistas, and in the past because they're so ignorant and they're so sure of what they're saying, like the nonsense. You find yourselves basically what's the word? Okay, yeah. You find yourself buying into the postulates that they present. So the postulate would be them starting off with a statement and then you guys engaging in an argument over that statement, but you're accepting that original statement as a fact when it isn't. That's a postulate essentially. So whenever they're like, well, the Spaniards were not as bad as the British and the blah blah, that like I get annoyed thinking back to those arguments because I always engage with the arguments from that point onward. But that's no, I'm not accepting that postulate. They were just as bad, if not worse, in a lot of ways than the British and the French. It's like, so I'm not even going to accept that to start the argument. Like, so I feel like that's where they're so dishonest, or because they're so uneducated, they'll state shit like that, and it's like that's not even factually true. If we look at stuff like Bartolome's sources here, like that's not even true itself. Like those postulates are completely wrong, But and that's what we need to start debating a lot of times is not even accepting those bullshit like postulates from the beginning. It's like, no, we're not even starting an argument off of that motherfucker, because what you're stating even from the get go is already wrong.
Yeah, you're right, man. I feel like we should at one time, one day, like go after like I know Brazil really tries to like make it romanticize the trifecta of African and like European and indigenous and believe it's some like
And that's
uh
ridiculous, because they, like, on average, they hardly are indigenous on average, bro. Like, I think from what I saw, like, isn't it something ridiculously low, like 60% European or 50, and then like 30% African, and then it's only like a small sliver, like 10 to 20 as indigenous. It's like, bro, that's because you wiped out so many natives. It should be the inverse. It should be like 60% or something should be like native, like Peru or Bolivia. Like what are you talking about? This isn't some glorified that you wiped out so many Amazon natives that, like, that's how little they contribute to the genetic makeup.
mhm. I agree. Yeah, exactly. Well, if there's any solace to this is that I have heard that there's some populations in Brazil aside from the indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest that do have, significant ancestry, but you're right about what you said, that that is the sad reality is that a lot of the population or the people that live there um, don't have a lot of indigenous ancestry because of so many native people that were either wiped out or forcefully tricked into sterilization again by German doctors that came there. Again, that's documented. I'm not for anyone that's watching that's saying, "Oh, Marcus, you're being racist" or something like. No, there's documentation of that.
Yeah, you know what? Fuck it. In the future, we can make a whole episode about the German doctors doing that
Yeah,
shit. We can
yeah,
do that whole thing.
definitely. No, yeah, for sure. I'll be looking forward to that. But I know we should probably finish this up and get
Yeah,
this article page done.
we'll finish the rest of these two pages to finish like the chapter. I guess we can close out there. We'll be able to finish up with the last video. We can finish up the rest of it. We don't have much left of the book, guys. This is, we're pretty much through most of it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, we're getting through it. So probably the next video we could that could be the final. But I'll finish off this part here after numerous, and we can be good to go.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, guys, I mean, like, we could have just read it strictly and no commentary, but I think you guys also like the commentary, because we do got to discuss a lot of the crap in here.
I mean, yeah, it's infuriating to read. Like you find out about the reality of why there's not as many native people in the northern Mexican region. What happened to the Caribbean islands? Why is it that there's people in Haiti and Jamaica that are mostly African American? I genuinely believe that most people that are unaware just think that Black Africans were always in Jamaica and were always in Haiti, and that's how life has always been. It's like, no, there was a great replacement that happened where indigenous people were wiped out or sent off to God knows where, and then replaced with Black African people,
Yeah,
Europeans too, mind you. Um, and that is why those countries are there in the state that they are today. Um,
100%.
yeah. Anyway, well, I think I was at after numerous. So
Yeah.
after numerous in inquidious, I think I know this word, iniquitous
Yeah, yeah.
attacks on the native population during the course of which, and quite without provocation, he was responsible for carnage on a grand scale. He proceeded to impose throughout the era of reign of terror he so beloved of Spanish butchers in the New World, allowing free rein to the officers under his command, inflict unprecedented barbarities upon the local people in order to squeeze gold and other offerings out of them. One of his officers was responsible for the indiscriminate slaughter of many locals, hanging some, burning others alive, and throwing yet others to wild dogs, sometimes sawing off their hands and feet, sometimes pulling out their tongues or hacking off their heads. Even though the locals never raised a finger against the Spaniards, the distinguished commander knowingly allowed this spat of atrocities to continue unchecked, directed as it was to terrorizing the local people into doing his bidding and into bringing him gifts of gold or other precious objects. On top of this, the Spaniards inflicted pain and untold misery on the entire native population, subjecting them to an unrelenting daily and even hourly round of lashes, beatings, and cruel treatment of every kind. It is said that this man was directly responsible for the looting and destruction of 800 towns and villages throughout the kingdom of Jalisco, and that it was because of his harsh treatment that the local people, seeing all around them perish under the Spanish yoke, were driven to despair and fleeing into the mountains, finally began to offer a measure of organized resistance, killing a handful of their oppressors in all justice they were fully entitled to do, as they were subjected to more and yet more injustice by Spaniards passing through the region on their way to tyrannize other provinces, or as they would put it, explore them. Many fortified themselves in certain mountain redoubts, although even though they were prey to the ferocious assaults which have ravaged and all but depopulated the entire province, of which have occasioned the deaths of countless innocents, the wretched Spaniards, having abandoned all Christian sense of right and wrong, have been totally given over to a reprobate mind, are utterly impervious both to the justice and actions of the local inhabitants and to the rights of these people, and quite properly enjoy under natural, divine, and Roman law to defend themselves by cutting the Spanish forces to pieces, and only if they were sufficient and in number and possessed of the necessary weapons, throwing them out of their land once and for all. The Spanish also proved blind to their own wickedness in persisting in waging war, even though such a course of action is condemned by all the laws known to man on a people on whom they have previously inflicted unpardonable wrongs and towards whom they have behaved in an evil and wicked fashion. On the contrary, they now proclaim and record for posterity their conviction that the victories they continue to enjoy over an innocent local population, by dint of massacring them, come from God, and that their wicked campaigns in the New World amount to a just war. They take care to give paeans of praise to the Lord and to recognize the part he has played in their success and his gift to them of wickedness, just like the thieves of whom the prophet Zechariah says in chapter 11, "Thus saith the Lord my God, feed the flock of the slaughter, whose possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty, that they sell them, say, Bless the Lord, blessed be the Lord, for I am rich." And we can go ahead and stop there. Next is the province of Santa Marta. Um, so, yeah, let me unshare my screen. Cool. And that's where we will stop for now. I believe we're just under an hour, 58 minutes. So, not bad. Um, I'm sure learning about the province of Santa Marta will bring us new knowledge of the mass genocide that took place within the Americas. So, again, to those that have watched this full video, thank you for watching. Juan, did you have anything else to add or discuss?
I think that's pretty much. I was just glancing. I'm guessing Panuco and Jalisco were just a region that were all in the. Because I think that was what I was looking up in the map. It was just all like in the same type of area. That's why
Yes.
they're used conjointly. So no, I mean, as we're seeing, like with the amount of massacres that happened, I think that also explains why Jalisco as a state is known to be more European as far as like ancestry wise than the other states. I think
Yeah.
it makes sense.
I think it makes sense because I think, again, there's like this knowledge of, oh, this is just how northern Mexico always was. And the massive replacement and extermination was mostly largely ignored. God knows what they teach in northern Mexico about that. So, yeah, Juan, this has been, I would say enjoyable, but it's been worthwhile discussing this with you. It's been good that we're spreading this knowledge. I would say enjoyable, obviously. Reading this is not so enjoyable, obviously.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I look forward to, pushing more content out with you, Juan, and then finishing this up.
For sure. And guys, just so you know, this is like a PDF that we've been reading. Mostly we got a PDF copy of the book. The PDF file itself is 46 pages. This is just on the computer. We're on page 32 of 46. So, we're mostly through. The next episode we'll be finishing this book up. But I'm glad that you guys have followed us this long through this series. I think it's really important that we get this out.
Yep, definitely. No, it's definitely been very insightful. learning about this and learning about new things that has gone on before us. But it's good to learn about this history because sometimes we make mistakes and assuming that things were the way they were because of X, Y, and Z, when in reality there's a lot more to a story. And specifically for us that are native descendants, it's important for us to understand it and those that watch it as well and those that aren't native. So yeah, we will stop here. It's an hour and a minute. So thank you all for watching. Look forward to making more content for you. And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe. It's free to do, helps the channel. And we like people to be aware of what's the true history of these continents. So that said, hope you all have a good day or night, wherever you're at. Adios.